that they would do this to the press and to the entire building, and they dragged Bishop Partridge around. They tarred and feathered him, dragged him around town square. So the closest that the church came to any success in court while they were in Missouri the entire time, and they brought many cases. None were ever brought against them, by the way. There was no need. They simply took things into their own hands. But the closest the church came was when Bishop Partridge and W.W. Phelps sued the perpetrators of this civic action. And they went to court, and as usual, the defendants claimed self-defense. And the lawyers properly pointed out that there were 2 men against about 200, and that's not much of a self-defense. So the judge had to agree that that's correct, and on the merits then they were upheld on their arguments, but they were awarded a total of 1 penny plus a peppercorn, which is the legal equivalent of an insult. In other words, we agree with you, you're right on the law and on the merits, but get out. We don't like you. So from Jackson County, they were expelled that same year. Actually, were expelled twice from Missouri, once from Jackson County and then later from the entire state. These other locations were all really quite friendly to them. Clay County, Ray County. Caldwell County was a county formed for themselves. It was a quarantine for the Mormons. Go there and maybe people won't bother you if you stay put. But they kept going, and many settled in Daviess County, so that was formed in that territory. They formed Daviess County. And the real trouble that put Joseph in Liberty Jail, there's another oxymoron, was Election Day in Daviess County, the first election in Gallatin County. We won't go through all of the details there, but the short of it was Joseph and about 15 others who had heard that after the Election Day riots, some of the Mormons were killed and left to rot, and no one could move the bodies. They would be picked clean by the buzzards, and they did not take well to that. So they retaliated in a form that was peaceable, all parties thought, and yet they were sued and brought before an old enemy of theirs named Austin A. King from Jackson County. And this was the beginning, really, of the so-called Mormon War of 1838. Through a series of events, this then resulted in the Extermination Order of October 27th. Almost everything really bad after Jackson County happened in a 3-month period in 1838. Here's Governor Boggs' order to the commander of the Northern Militia, after several hearings and false affidavits from disaffected leaders of the church. And here's the famous statement: the Mormons must be treated as enemies and exterminated or driven from the state. That was rescinded, by the way, in 1976, exactly 30 years ago, by Governor Bond. Now, just 3 days later, we had the Haun's Mill Massacre, and then we had the siege of Far West on Halloween Day, appropriately. Just the next day. It wasn't enough to have the Haun's Mill Massacre. Now we need to surround the city and threaten a total destruction of the entire city and everyone in it unless peace could be made. And through various means, Joseph was captured with Hiram and several of the leaders. They were ordered to be shot the next day. Their former lawyer who defended them in some of this action there in Missouri, Alexander Donovan, was the one commanded to shoot them at Town Square at noon the next day. His answer was, what you have ordered is cold-blooded murder, and I will not perform it. And should you do that, I will see you brought before the justice bar of God, so help me God. And so he backed down and remanded everyone over to that same Austin King, who then saw that they had a comfortable lodging in Richmond and then in Liberty. Now, Liberty, of course, was a horrible place, but it was a bigger jail than they had anywhere else in Missouri at that time, and so that's where they spent almost 6 months, the worst 6 months of Joseph's life, I would say, the longest time he was incarcerated. The entire first presidency of the church was in jail. And why wasn't the 12 in jail? Well, because they were considered irrelevant. While Joseph was there, though, in this horrible prison of a dungeon, dungeon of a prison, he also considered it a sacred place, and some of the most inspiring revelations came while he was there. He wrote a 16-page letter home that became sections 121, 22, and 23 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And if you ever feel sorry for yourself, feel like life is not fair and it's not treating you right and it should do you better, read any of those sections and you'll have a second thought. Many of the lessons Joseph learned endured through the end and sustained him in Illinois. Now, leadership, as I say, such as it was being provided by the 12. And who was the head of the 12 after Thomas B. Marsh was gone? Well, Brigham Young. And he had the experience of the first mass evacuation of the saints. He was in charge. And they went east. The thought was always to go west, but circumstances did not allow that. Joseph had talked about it. Brigham had planned for it. It was not to be. They went east, back across the river to Quincy, where again kind people received them well. Now, Joseph gets to escape during a change of venue from Liberty up to Boone County. He finally gets to this new settlement that had been arranged by Brigham and Joseph and several others, this bend in the river, and we know much about that. It's not so much legal, though, as physical and spiritual. The next year, 1840, was probably Joseph's best year of his life. He didn't have a single lawsuit all year. He was out of jail. They did not have a lot of success going to D.C. to get some redress from the federal government, but they got the Nauvoo Charter before the end of that year. And this was an amazing thing. 3 other cities had similar charters, but none of them implemented it quite as effectively as Nauvoo did. They were basically given their own army. A local militia, 3,000 strong. The Nauvoo Legion was the terror of southern Illinois. Now, it was never utilized except for ceremonial things, but it was always armed and dangerous, ready for action. Joseph saw to that, and this was well known. They were given their own independent judiciary, and legally speaking, this is probably the most important thing in the city charter, because they had the power of habeas corpus, which simply means if you're arrested by somebody that you think is going to kill you or do you some serious harm, you send word, you have one of your colleagues go to the nearest court that has this power, and that court can issue a writ of habeas corpus, which means stop everything, bring the body here, we want to talk to this prisoner to see if he's been falsely arrested, and see what this is all about. So it's the chance to have a second examination. And this was used effectively over and over by Joseph, much to the chagrin of the neighbors, and was the main reason they wanted to repeal the Nauvoo Charter. They were given their own mayor, John C. Bennett. That's another story. We have a city council. We even had a University of Nauvoo. This was really a very complete program. A little city-state is what we had in Nauvoo. And legally, things went very, very well. Starting with this man, John C. Bennett, who started off quite well, was given some great promises in section 124, but all of them were highly conditional, and as it turns out, he was a saintly scoundrel. He was Joseph's Judas. Now, he was companioned with this man who went to the first presidency the very same week that John C. Bennett became the mayor. These two were kindred spirits, and Joseph later, 1 week before he died, said that all of our sorrows as a family have arisen through the influence of that one man. I had always attributed more to John C. Bennett than I had to William Law. The man was converted to the gospel by John Taylor, who later said he was one of the most calculating and deceptive but gracious and courteous men that you would ever meet. So we'll put him out of the picture for now. Back to better things. Those two were the start of the internal corrosion that finally brought the end of the saints, Joseph and Nauvoo. But they were successful in electing their own man for governor, good-looking man, very fair, Supreme Court justice, far better than any governor they'd had before, Tom Ford. They also were treated well judicially. Here's Stephen A. Douglas. He's the one on your right, not the left. This habeas corpus was not only used in Nauvoo, but it was also effectively applied when they were outside of Nauvoo. On one occasion, Joseph was seized and On the old writs that I told you about, when they were still in Missouri, he'd left under the cover of night, got back across the river. So now they wanted him extradited back to Missouri.